attorney at law, Marcus Goff, attorney representing families who currently occupy the Bob Marley Beach. So I think we have Marcus Goff online, attorney at law. Good morning, Marcus Goff. How are you doing?
Good morning, Mr. Kabul.
Right. Let me just say thank you so much. And wow, what great work you've been doing. I know that it's taxing and that it's not the most desired space for many attorneys to be in. That is in defense of access and rights to the beach. How difficult has it been for you, or challenging?
Very yes. I mean, I think, the issues are long-term issues in the country. And so, whenever these things arise, I think people feel very concerned, So it's been very heartwarming to at least see a lot of positive responses from the public in general to this issue.
All right. I know that you're part of JABEM, and that the attorney representing JABEM, that is, and that it is as within this capacity that you are now representing the families who currently occupy the Bob Marley Beach. Can you give us a little bit of historical background to that, your own involvement in that, and what that situation is?
Sure. So, the Pakistan community has had a long presence at that beach for many, many decades. It's the site of the first time being the center in Jamaica, where the first time being the priest was seated and administered from. And so there's a continuation of Rastafari presence there, and particularly Bongo Gabi was one of the first Rastafari elders who brought the Marleys to that beach, as well as Ras Maka and his family, two Rastafari families who have been on the beach for many decades and have continued to maintain the space and to essentially build up what it is today. So when one of them, in particular, those families started to receive messages, being sent and phone calls received, and these things essentially telling them they need to leave their home by a certain date or it will be bulldozed. That's when the families reached out to JABEM, Jamaica Beach Water Environmental Movement, to really see if they could assist. And JABEM reached out to me to see how I could assist them in that process, and that's how I really became engaged in this matter.
Yes. So far, one of the things that you have done is to engage the court in this, because this obviously, you looking on it, you said this is, while the activism is happening, this is also a court matter, a legal matter. Why was it important to go to the court, even while there was so much activism on the ground?
These messages that were being sent were very, insistent and persistent, essentially, and what they were saying is that, you would be bulldozed, that no one can stop it, and, that kind of a thing. And they were really intimidated and feeling vulnerable. And so the only legal route I thought would be most protective of the families was to seek an injunction in the court to prevent any threatened demolition of those homes and that building that is there built by Bongo Gabi. And that's what we then sought to do. So we got the injunction from the Supreme Court on the 21st of October, and we go back to court in that matter on the 18th of November.
Right, so you're looking at just 2 weeks and mash. Let me ask you this, because since then, we've heard voices coming out of both the Wolf Group and from government. And let me play for you, and I hope you can listen, you can hear this. If not, then I'll tell you what. It's the Prime Minister saying that the government will not be selling Bob Marley Beach in St. Andrew, and that the government's policy is not to sell beaches. But let me play this for our listeners so they can hear the Prime Minister on this.
I wanted to go and visit the Bob Marley Beach because I saw a social media post. I saw a video being circulated that Andrew Holness want to take away poor people land. I immediately saw through it, because all that Andrew Holness has ever done is to give poor people access to land and housing. But I took heart, because immediately a young lady called me and she said to me, Prime Minister, I hope you're not going to stop the hotel development that is coming. Because now watch what him said. There are thousands of young men and women in the parish who want work. Don't stop the development, Prime Minister. They have been there for years and years. How much people they employ? How many lives have they transformed? How is the parish going to be developed without bringing in industry and commerce and housing.
All right. Did you get a chance to hear that, Marcus?
Yes, definitely.
Right. Your comments.
Well, I think that oftentimes, when we have issues of so-called development, right, and jobs and income, then it seems to be, juxtaposed and made to be contradictory to people's rights, and it doesn't have to be that way. Oftentimes when you maybe express concern about the way development is happening, then it's a kind of common retort. You've heard, over many decades, and around the world too, that somehow you're anti-development. But it's not, I think, that accurate a context. There's no time that Jabem or I really said that, we were against the development, right? But what we're against, of course, is where development is meant to proceed, right, without proper respect and due regard and due process for people's rights. And oftentimes that is what we see when it comes down to the issues of land and beach land and hotel tourist development.
Another thing that that he has responded to, that is Prime Minister Andrew Holness, he says that the government is not in the business of selling beaches. He says this is not something that they do. But what we're finding, though, is that we're losing access to the beaches. From a legal perspective, and we've had many conversations on this in this space with Jabem and others about the Beach Act. When the Prime Minister says the government is not in the business of selling beaches, he is being a bit disingenuous, isn't he? What can you tell us about the law regarding whether or not Jamaicans have a right to access the beach?
Yes. Well, certainly. I mean, I think that, the government's response to even initially, when we heard from Minister of Information at first, they made that statement and, the release seemed to suggest that they had no idea what we were talking about and there's nothing going on down there and, all is safe, And then, obviously, we hear the Prime Minister confirm that there is development happening and that, there's no sale of beach going to be happening. So, the reality is, I think, I mean, to be clear with everyone, is that when we talk about beach access issues, right, the beach access issues arise because persons who own land are joining the beach, right, which the public would have to use to access the beach, oftentimes restrict public access to the beach by virtue of blocking off access to their lands. And so that's the real issue. Right? That's the real issue that, of course, has allowed the hotel development crossing North Coast to be done, and for many persons, of course, to be the private access to beaches that for many generations prior were public beaches, were accessible beaches to the public. But because infrastructure has been built up, hotel development built up, and then, gated properties put in place, and restricted access allowed, that's where the issues always arise. That is how the public has been denied access to beaches over many decades. And so the issue is not the beach license and the selling of the actual beach with the sand and the water. That's not the issue. The issue is that when you allow private persons who have landlords joining the beaches to then feel that they can block off the public access to the beaches without any recourse, without any consultation, without any thought of the lives are disrupting in that process. That's the problem. That is the issue. And so when you can have a rich landowner, whether it's rich or not, you have a landowner who has this land adjoining the beach, they want to do some development, and they're talking about making money and bringing people. It sounds nice and lovely, and people say, yes, we want this. But then what about all those many families, the fisher folk, the residents who come from near and far to enjoy the beach, to enjoy the right to a healthy environment? What about their rights? And they say it cannot be that one whole set of persons who are Jamaicans oftentimes and locals have their rights disrupted simply because we have the prospect of some foreign dollars coming in. It cannot be right. And there must be a way we can sustainably be able to attract and maintain those foreign incomes that are not disrupting and depriving the people of their legitimate right to enjoy their natural environment.
It seems to me that the Prime Minister would know this, don't it?
You must know this because it's a long-term issue. If you are in governance, you're in politics, you're aware of public administration over many decades, you have known that the fisher folk in Jamaica, right, have been fighting this fight for decades, and numerous administrations successively have come into power and said that we're not going to deprive the public beaches of the access by the public, not going to deprive the shepherd of their livelihood. And then here comes a big proposal from some big development, and the talk changes, or the action don't match the talk. And so they say it's not a new issue. And we must at some stage come to address these old ways of thinking, these old pieces of legislation that continue to enable the government to deprive people of their rights while facilitating, or say, all that the foreigners want over us here.
And so the way Jabem is framing this, and I think it is brilliant, is to say the beach access is a land issue in Jamaica. The Prime Minister talks about not denying people access to land, not selling beach. The government not in the business of selling beach. But from what you have outlined just now and underscored, is that okay? So you're not selling this, but there's no access. There's no access for people to get to the beach because the land around the beach that would provide access to the beach are owned by private landowners who have been given that right. So there is in land ownership in Jamaica, as it relates to the beach, the right to deny access, it would appear. Am I phrasing that right, or am I totally off key here?
Yes, that's right. That's right. So within the landowner's general right as a landowner, you have the right to exclude persons from the property. It's called the right to exclusive possession. So that is an established part of your land right as a landowner. However, now, of course, the law provides that where the public has been using a piece of land or lands or tracks or pathways or roads to be able to get to and from the beach, then they have the right to continue to use those lands and pathways and tracks, etc., to use the beach indefinitely. And that's where the issue lies, because the Prescription Act now says that the public would then have to go to court to establish their long-held rights. As long as it's alleged for over 20 years, to be able to use the beach, you can go to court to have that right recognized by law.
And this would be, I'm going to take a break and come back, but I'm throwing a question before I go. This would be an unbroken occupation over that 20 years. What if there's a break in the occupation, and then you come back to say, we used to use it, but then there was a break. But let me take a quick break and come back. 16 after 7 o'clock, and my very special guest online is Dr. Marcus Goff. We're looking at the Bob Marley Beach in particular, but kind of tearing apart also, unpacking the Prime Minister's speech in which he said that the government of Jamaica is not in the business of selling beaches, and also went on to say that he's really, and his government, for development and for access to land and access to the beaches. Really and truly, that is not the case in terms of our reality. So Attorney at Law Marcus Goff is helping us to understand this within the context of the current ongoing situation on Bob Marley Beach. So Marcus, the question then is, so if you've occupied the beach for over 20 years, if you've had access to this beach for over 20 years, the law provides for what did you say?
It provides for the public to be able to apply to court under the Prescription Act to get the public's right of access to the beach recognized by the court and endorsed on the relevant land titles that adjoin the beach.
And then the question I was asking, if there's an unbroken occupation, if something happens, let us say there's a beach that the residents in this area have been using for 50 years, because there are many like those, and then something happens and there's a break, do they still have that right?
So the Act says that if there's been a break, in terms of the 20-year period, then that break will not have any effect on your rights unless the public acquiesces in that break for 1 year.
Okay. And I'm asking you this because, although we're talking about the Bob Marley Beach, we're looking at the situation at Little Duns River, where there was a shooting in the vicinity of Little Duns River, in the vicinity of Big Duns River, in the vicinity of many other tourist attractions in that area, because they're very close to each other. But Little Duns River has been locked off and locked down. Yellow tapes are still up and literally closed by the UDC. What that is doing is that is creating a break in the ongoing occupation of the space by the residents who have been occupying that space for over 60 years. And off the top of your head, what does that look like to you? Will there be an effect there, or does the law protect those because it was closed by the Urban Development Corporation and the police because of a shooting in the vicinity?
Well, I think that it's unfortunate, and I must say that I hear similarities. We hear about crime and violence in some spaces, and that is a justification for the introduction of foreign interest. It's a similar story we've heard before. And so one must consider there is some connection between these activities and events, but certainly within the 1 year period, I think that the public should express, some concern, some voice, essentially to show that they do not appear to this blockage, because it certainly will be very likely be used against the public in the future if the beach remains closed without any sort of reaction or protest or lack of agreement to that action.
So John Bem is going to have to get you on that case urgently. So let us go back to Bob Marley Beach now. So what is the latest now? What can you tell us? Where do you go from here legally regarding the issues surrounding Bob Marley Beach?
Right, so the Prescription Act claim, we are still finalizing it actually. There are several persons and organizations who would like to be a part, and so we are finalizing that to put in the court this week coming. And once that's in the court, then, we expect that we will be able to get that court order in due course, because as I say, that beach without a doubt has been used from a long time, much more than 20 years, and I don't see how anyone would be able to prevent that order being made in light of the undisputed facts around that beach access. With regard to the other case in the Supreme Court, which involves the injunction application, and that case essentially seeking to have recognized Bongadabi family rights to their land that they have held based on adverse possession, that case is going to also go to the court. It will take a longer time, to the Supreme Court, as these cases do, but we're also very confident at the end of that process we will get the land ownership and land title recognized for the Stevenson family.
Something that the Jamaican public might not be able to differentiate is when the Prime Minister said that the land surrounding the beach belongs to that's not sold to Wolf, that is a commission of lands, as opposed to Crown lands. I mean, how are we to understand that?
The reality is that it is not clear at all. It's not clear at all. We've had several discussions with the National Land Agency on these issues. At one stage we were told it wasn't Crown land. And I should say that, the two families are different. So when it seems in the family, Bongadabi's family, they are said to be on Wood Group's land, right? Again, we're not accepting that, but that is what the land title seems to show. Whereas where the Thomas family, who were told originally was private land, and they applied generally for adverse possession to get their title. And they were out at the end of that process when they were told, it's government land, you have to prove 60 years now to get adverse possession. But then last week, they came down here and confirmed that it's not in fact government land, and so they should be issued with their title in short order, we are told. So the reality that, as I understand it, is that not all the land in Jamaica has been properly surveyed and documented and so forth. It's the ongoing process in doing that, and that what's there for in the data office is necessarily what is on the ground in reality, and that's why again I want to highlight that the issue I think is not squatting in this country, right? Squatting I think is a symptom of the problem. The issue is the imposition of this white racist European land tenure system that we've had imposed upon indigenous and African land tenure systems. That's the problem we have right here.
Of course, yes.
We have this colonial model that we've imposed. We have the tradition that family land and community land that we've had pre-existing European imposition, and we've not been able to properly resolve those conflicts, while at the same time giving the law the right to recognize the European model as predominant. That's a real problem for people who have not had any separation, right, from state and colonization, who have been the majority of the landlords for so long, and the legal system recognizes them as the priority of those who have come after, who are based on a European concept of land ownership.
Yes, it's the colonization of our rights. But let me go to the Prime Minister again, just so our listeners understand that the Prime Minister has responded, and he also said that he talked about public access to the beach. Let's listen to this.
Because as I tell you, this politics of poverty is so dangerous. Use poor people to stop their own development. Can you imagine that? Use poor people to stop development. Now that is a private matter. So I never open my mouth on it. I don't get involved in it because it is a private matter. Just to be clear, the Bob Marley Beach is owned by the Commission of Lands. And there is no intention whatsoever to sell the beach. In fact, government policy is that we do not sell beach land beachfront. Want to make that clear. So if there were any concerns, please rest assured that's not the case.
He said, rest assured, but this comment from the Prime Minister is connected directly to the Wolf Group and to the fact that obviously there's a construction of hotel in the area which borders St. Thomas, and how this will impact the residents who have been living and carrying out business at the location. Let me play this final clip from him.
So all them people who come promising you all kind of things, run them. The only way we're going to end poverty in this parish, when we get the road in, we get investment in, we get employment in, and you start to get work. And when you get work, you get your income, and your income gives you independence. And with that independence, you have greater choice. So if you were poor enough to depend on a man to support you, because you have income, you are liberated from that. If you are poor and boy, you have to go getting a chopping and scamming, you are liberated from that. And that is what we want to do. And that is why it just puzzles me when I saw that video being circulated, where the average man not going to understand that what this man said in the video is stopping your own progress and prosperity.
It's a very irresponsible statement, Dr. Marcus Goff, from the Prime Minister regarding people fighting for their rights, fighting for access to the land, access to the beach, and for the overturning then of colonial laws regarding access. You mentioned earlier that this is steeped in our historical inequities. Develop on that for me within the context that the Prime Minister just talked about. This is people turning poor people against themselves.
Right. Well, I mean, so, when I hear the Prime Minister say it's a private matter, I'm saying the fact is that the government is very much in bed with impunity, right? And so I'm trying to pretend that the government is not interested in the matter and is a neutral and impartial third party, of course, far from the truth, right? And when you look at it, whether it's for you're applying for a beach license, or you're applying to get a title, like an adverse possession, or you're applying to get, to run a hotel development, it all has to go through the government. And so the government has a responsibility, right, to create a legal framework and enabling framework that allows people to get access to land and to be able to hold on to their traditional land that they have held for some time. Right? It can't be left up to just the private sector at all, especially where we know, as Professor said, that this has been proposed to the government a long time ago, and the government is very much supportive of the move. So the Prime Minister can't act as if he seems a neutral third party. In terms of historical connection, then yes, certainly, again, the reality is that because we've had, again, for many generations, land being held in Jamaica under various types of circumstances that did not necessarily conform to the English system of land tenure and land ownership, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when now comes imposed upon that, this system, like which, the land titling system really is based on there being proper mapping and documentation and surveys and so forth of the entire property to be able to then manage it in a holistic way, in a comprehensive way in terms of planning and so forth. Right?
Mm-hmm.
The way it is done, as I say, is that, as we know today, there's still not a comprehensive all-encompassing plan in terms of mapping and so forth that has been done for Jamaica.
Mm-hmm.
And so oftentimes people are able to get titles, a paper title, right?
Mm-hmm.
For large acreage of land, large tracts of land, right? Where people are living on sometimes for generations. And these people, as well as being able to pay and go through the legal process, right, get their paper title and become a legal owner. Whereas on the land, sometimes they have many families who are long-standing with no right to recognize. And that's a big problem because you shouldn't be issuing titles, first of all, by estimate. You shouldn't be issuing titles where we don't have a proper, clear, accurate idea of what's on the ground, who's on the ground, and where they are on the ground. And certainly we should not be issuing titles on the premise that these titles have the effect of, as I say, extinguishing in some respects, right? The pre-existing right of those who have been there a long time. And that's the problem that we have, because right now, the title system is what people call the curtain principle. That once you have a title, the law says that you should not look behind the curtain, behind the title, to see how this person got the title. But so oftentimes there's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes in that process that allow for people to get dispossessed because of the inefficiency of the system and because of these presumptions which are skewed and geared toward the people's interests.
Hold on there. Back up a minute for me. And I know you have to go, Dr. Marcus Gow, but back up for me. Did you say the law says there's a principle that you can't look behind the title to see how this person came by the title? That is in law?
Yes, that is the whole principle that we have right now. It's called the current system of land ownership. That a title is deemed to be absolute and irrefusable, and you should, once you see the person name on the title, how they got it behind the scenes, they say you should not concern yourself with, because the presumption is that all of that behind the scenes will legitimate their ownership. But in reality, it does not work that way. It does not work that way oftentimes. And so you have a land title owner on paper with their name and their rights there, and those who are on the land long time, out no paper, they recognize none at all.
And it leads us to the question of how Jamaica itself came into so many land. Or when I say Jamaica, I mean this idea of crown lands and the government of Jamaica, the Commission of Lands and so on, how they themselves came into that land. But that's a whole other conversation. But let me just ask you, because with bearing all of that in mind, I know that JABEM is looking at the Beach Act in totality to say this is what we should be focused on, because it is the problem. It's a colonial era document that is steeped in colonialism and colonial laws. Let us look at the work you're doing with taking this to court, and there's an injunction and so on. Does it then translate? What does a win for Bob Marley Beach translate to a win for other beaches, or we have to take them one by one and go to the Beach Act as JABEM is saying?
Yes, that is the issue right now. I mean, that's a problem, that the law says that the public has these rights, but then you have to go to court to enforce these rights, right? And so that puts then the burden, the onus on the public to know how to come together to be able to, whether it's a get lawyer, to coordinate, to file a court action, to get what is the legal recognition of their long-standing rights. And we're saying it shouldn't be that way. It should not be that way. It shouldn't be on the public to have to go and find resources to do that. It should be on the state. Right? To be able to do a thorough examination of what's happening on the ground, around all of the island beaches, and ascertain, and I say there, where persons have been using it for some time, and put in the law the protection that the public needs for that. They should have to go to court to do that. The government and state should do that in protection and in defense of the people's rights to enjoy their natural environment.
Couldn't the government do this in Parliament?
It could be done by passage of law, certainly. The passage of law, and that's why we're saying that we have to review these things. We have a prescription law that is from 1882, right? 1882 is what we're relying on our public rights. And so there's no way that the rights of the public could be properly reflected in such a piece of legislation. I mean, the that you have it still to use, so that it's something. The fact is that these must be needed to be reviewed. About this thing called happening in 1956 as well, pre-independence. And so these frameworks, that we were then working within, and that fit within for a proper post-colonial empowering of our people.
All right, two final things, Dr. Goff. One is there are accusations of bribery, as far as we're hearing, by persons who are involved, of the people who are on the beach there now. Can you respond to this? Have you heard of this, and what do you know?
Well, that this has been encouraging people, to leave, and this has been helping people know that they'll pay for you to be relocated, maybe to pay some rent for a few months or somewhere else, or they'll give you a piece of land somewhere else away from the beach. I know the Stevensons were offered some land over the hill, away from the beach, some very rocky land, and land that they were told was also occupied by other people who are also being dispossessed, and so yes, we've been hearing about these things, and this group seems to think that this is a good way to approach it. They're doing something benevolent by offering people money to leave, but I'm saying if these people have land right, and you're asking them to relocate them to where they don't want, you're not asking to buy their land from them, but to relocate them, then they're not properly respecting their land right. And we're saying that this is not appropriate. If you want to get these people off, you must do the legal thing, or the legal route. Don't try and go behind and underneath the legal framework to get them to abandon their family homes. That's right, and it won't work.
Yeah, well, it makes my last question almost null and void, because in Friday's newspapers, the Gleaner, we saw the headline: developer says Bob Marley Beach access not at risk, and that's a Wolf Group, of course, that was saying this. And Donovan Reed, which is a director of a company developing the $200 million luxury resort in St. Thomas. The newspaper said that he was hitting back at critics, saying that the project, they're not denying access, but this is in the court. The court has put an injunction on persons who are trying to get the people of the land, and you've said to us that they're trying to move the people. So how do you respond to Mr. Reed and that headline in the newspapers on Friday?
Yeah, so, he seems to be thinking that because they're asking people to go, right, that is appropriate, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm saying that is not appropriate, right? To be asking them and to be incentivizing them with money and to be calling them consistently, you know, and to be also, right, having police visit them very often time, saying maybe these messages is not an appropriate way to go, right? And it has boiled down as the intimidation. A person just lived there for many years. And so the proper way to go, police would have been to get a lawyer, right, to write a legal letter. If you think you have the land rights to do that, you get the people to go off, and if that doesn't work, you take the proper matter into court, you get a court order to get them to leave. But certainly, you know, by seeking to do what they're doing is not appropriate. Now, what this is saying is that they have this large plan that they have laid out to government for how they would want the area to be developed under their management and ownership, right? And I'm saying the public has never seen or heard of this before. It's only them and the government know about this plan. So how they're asking us about, you know, why are we saying this when there is this plan? We don't know this plan. There's no one who has been consulted on the ground in Bilby or on the list about this plan. So we don't know about this plan. Only them and the government know about this plan. And we're saying that if you have a plan in mind, again, it must be that you're going to be consulting the people on the ground, the relevant stakeholders, to see how they can work. We can't have on one side, it cannot be alone develop, and they're going to have it to the government impose on the people with any kind of discussion and consultation. So again, we don't know what is their plan, but we know what we've been hearing, we know what we've been told, and so we've been proactive to allow the court to have its say where these rights should be.
So in the meantime, because there is this big development plan, and we have no problem with development, but it must be sustainable development, taking into consideration the residents of the area you're developing. The people who are from along the coastline all the way to St. Thomas should begin to look at what the plans are for those areas and to determine for themselves, whether with a lawyer or otherwise, whether or not they're in danger of losing lands that they themselves have been occupying for a long time, and how, and maybe losing access also to the beach. Would you suggest that?
Very much so, because we hear that Wolf has over 300 acres in that location there. So what they're doing is very massive development there. And so it's likely to displace many more people than just those who are using or occupying land by Marley Beach. And so, yes, again, these things should be done in a managed way. Don't have people hear about it in the press for the first time. You know, go to the community, see some town hall meetings, have some consultation with the people, hear their ideas and their concerns and so forth, you know, but it cannot be high-handed. You need lots of other approach that says, we know what is best for you, you don't know, and we're going to do this for you with or without you. Right.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Marcus Goff. I know I kept you a whole 8 or so minutes over time, so let me let you go. But thank you so much, and we'll talk to you again. Great work, by the way. Thank you so much. All right.
The informative information presented in this video is motivational and is positively aimed at inspiring, educating and entertaining the viewers with the cutting edge of critical reasoning. If you enjoy the contents on the Black Radar YouTube channel, please consider subscribing to show your support.
To speak with Dr. Arthur Green, medical doctor, Pan-Africanist, and he joins me on the phone line. And full disclosure, of course, I'm speaking to my husband in this segment of the program. Dr. Arthur Green is a medical doctor. We're going to be looking at maintaining your best health in a traumatized society, even as we gear up to speak in a while on African spirituality and the concept of well-being. As African people, this is how it is. Good morning, Dr. Arthur Green. How are you?
Hotep, greetings.
All right. Thank you so much for coming on this morning to talk about this issue, maintaining your best health in a traumatized society. Jamaica is a traumatized society, isn't it?
Oh, most definitely. You know, this is a landscape in which we are exposed directly or indirectly to trauma on a daily basis, and for over a very long period of time. And so, you know, many of us have now reached to the stage where we don't even realize that we are traumatized, because to some extent we have normalized that ongoing trauma in order to cope and to get along.
And when we talk about trauma, in terms of examples, and to connect that back to the fact that we're saying that we're living in a traumatized society, what would that be? What would those be?
Well, for example, we have trauma on a daily basis. Look at the numbers of violent accidents, floodings, you know, fires that takes lives. You have murders, which we have over 1,000 murders that is reported on an annual basis for over 2 decades. And when we look at these acts, for example, it's not just the act in and of itself that is traumatic, but the persons related to the immediate families and the communities of those victims, the trauma to the children and the family left behind unattended to. And even when we watch the news that report these traumatic incidents, the viewers are also impacted.
Mm-hmm.
So it's direct, indirect, and co-tangent in terms of how we are impacted by the trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have trauma that affects us, for example, based on our daily survival, because trauma is related to stress, and stress is just the response of the body to deal with challenges that we face on a daily basis. Now, where we're able to cope easily with the challenge, then that stress is not harmful. When, however, we are overwhelmed or overburdened, such as a person who is unemployed and is faced with light bills, water bills to pay the mortgage, and you have no recourse or any idea of how you will face that, it will become a stressful situation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And these impacts people's minds in different ways. So the brain function is altered, and our behavior or mood can change. You have various moods, whether you are happy, sad, fearful, angry, you might be just agitated or disgusted. And
Mm-hmm.
these moods put people in a vulnerable position, because prolonged negative situations can also weaken the immune system, which opens the door to further insult from more serious injuries along the way.
All right, so let us unpack what you have said there, which I think is critical to lay that out within the context of the traumatized society that we're living in, and the fact that so many of us are traumatized. We're talking about PTSD, not just post-traumatic stress disorder, but post-traumatic slavery disorder, and later on we'll talk some more about that with our sister Aya. But to come forward now to look at then how stress, because of trauma, you've pointed to stress and how stress can impact the physical body. So let us talk about that, to go to how do you maintain your best health is the ultimate, the aim of this conversation that we're having. But let us look now at how is the body impacted physically by stress?
Well, it's interesting, because when we speak about health in general, the tendency is that it's almost impossible to think of health without including mental health. And the mental health also is connected to physical health. So these two, they are parallel to each other, and they interact with each other. So we really have to look at them. But as you say, physically, stress that we are able to cope with is not a problem. So we are living in a world where we must have stress, whether a child facing an examination or you jump in your vehicle and drive on the road. It's a stressful event, but you are able to cope, and so there is no harm there.
Mm-hmm.
But where one becomes overwhelmed by any stressful situation, and over a period of time, as you suggested, then it has the effect of causing your heart to race, palpitations, anxiety, headaches, dizziness. It can cause even increase in the blood pressure, blood sugar. So these are physical impacts that it has. It can lead to heart conditions. For some people, it may lead to loss of sleep, inability to sleep, insomnia, becoming agitated from that.
Mm-hmm.
It can lead to indigestion, where you are unable to digest your food properly. And over time, of course, such events can lead to, gastritis, ulcers, and things like those. So these are real physical effects that one can get from stress. One of the common impact of stress is just tension. So if you know you're facing, like, a person not working, and he knows the month end is coming and the landlord will be hounding him for rent.
Mm-hmm.
Just the mere thought of a situation like that brings you under stress.
Mm-hmm.
And that stress results in tension that is normally felt in the neck, the shoulders, the back, lower back. And so a lot of the shoulder pains, stiffness of the neck and lower back pain, and so that we have, these are physical pain, but sometimes the root cause is really rooted in ongoing stress. So we process it mentally and actually arrest the stress in these parts of the body. Mm-hmm. And because it's residing there in an unnatural situation, it results in inflammation and results in tension, spasm, and pain.
Mm-hmm.
So these are physical impacts.
Mm-hmm.
And as we said earlier, it doesn't matter what the stress is, as long as it's overwhelming, whether it's psychological, financial, physical, whatever it is due to poverty, the result is the same.
And then we are in the perfect storm because we have all of this in addition to the fact that we are the second most murderous country in the world. So there is that fear of just existing. Then we have an unusual situation on the island of motor vehicle accidents. So there's also an additional stress when you just to get up and to move on a daily basis. So we are in a pressure cooker, literally for health, negative health impacts from just the environment that we are existing in, isn't it?
Well, precisely so. You hit the nail on the head when you mentioned fear, because that's one of the emotions that we can trigger. When you're confronted with a situation, the typical reaction is what they call fight or flight. So we choose whichever one we think is more appropriate. But fear is one of those emotions, which is a kind of abnormal configuration in the brain that is one of the most powerful emotions, and it's so dangerous because it is even more powerful. It doesn't allow you to gather your thoughts. So when you're overcome with fear, you might freeze, you don't react, and your intelligence level goes down in that moment to zero. And so when people are in a state of fear, you could easily see, for example, the not so long gone COVID-19 pandemic was a classic example. One of the main things that it invoked was fear, naturally. And the arbitrators of this pandemic, they used the fear with great effect to control the people and the populations, locally and globally. Because fear puts you in a defenseless position, and allows the person in charge at that time to be able to manipulate you with minimal resistance.
So we're really in a lot of Jamaicans. I said that all Jamaicans are experiencing, but a lot of Jamaicans are like deers trapped in a headlight, literally, or frogs. Let us say frogs, but we have more of that. And I grew up in an era when frogs are caught in a headlight, them don't move. I don't know if you know that.
Right.
So this is
that's right.
So we're trapped like that, but and we're trapped by the fact that we have so much violence around us. Crime and violence, it's difficult to exist in a situation like that. So, but we're trying to exist, or the aim is to survive, and this is where I think, when you talk about fight or flight, but this is where survival skills kick in. How all of this is affecting us physically, psychologically, I think critical to talk about. It's important for us to zoom in on this. You mentioned earlier high blood pressure, diabetes. These are conditions that are very, 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 very common on the island. Let us talk about how they manifest, first of all. What are the symptoms and what causes diabetes and also high blood pressure?
Well, from the point of view of the ongoing stress, as we say, it would cause palpitation. You have certain hormones that are released in the body, and these hormones, in their typical response, will cause increase in the heart rate, increase in the blood pressure, which are normal in certain circumstances to overcome normal doable situation. However, when the condition is prolonged, and prolonged is the operative word, and that's why PTSD will always come up as being critical. When it is prolonged, meaning that the stress is ongoing for 6 weeks, 3 months, going on into years, then this is when now this ongoing increased heart rate, the ongoing upheaval of the hormones in the bodies, these will cause an unusual reaction in the immune system, which will already open the doorway for other illnesses to come in. So with a weakened immune system, the body's response is compromised, and so whether you are getting infectious illnesses, which themselves can shut down the organs, the heart, the kidneys, the brain, or whether you are getting more organ-centered illnesses, the gastrointestinal system. These are the type of things that set the groundwork for development of ulcers, diabetes, because one of the responses, for example, to these type of stress would be like binging, which would lead itself to obesity, and the obesity itself puts you at risk not only for heart disease and hypertension, but also diabetes. So this is a complex situation, it's very, very complex because, for example, the gut health, the colon health in particular, is very critical for it to be functioning normally because, believe it or not, there's a strong connection between the colon and the brain. Now, normally, we have good bacteria that works with us in symbiosis, which they call the microbiota or the microbiome. And these organisms actually, if our diet is correct, meaning we have enough fiber and so on, will produce certain chemicals that the brain would normally make itself. So by they producing these neurotransmitters, for example, these are the things that they would enter the bloodstream, go to the brain, and it would help to keep us calm and better able to cope with stress. So even when we are not eating properly because whether we are not able to afford the proper diet or the stressful situation renders us, not having any appetite and so on, or that result in any kind of imbalance in the colon, it will affect us immensely, although it seems like such a trivial thing. So the gut health is very critical to mental health. And so when that balance is disrupted, we are already, again, more exposed to serious illnesses.
All right. Hold that thought for me. Let me take a quick break and come back. Now we'll make that 8 o'clock inside of the Africa Forum. In this segment of the program, we're talking about maintaining your best health in a traumatized society. It's a sad commentary, but Jamaica is the second most, just the other day it was the first, but it is now the second most murderous country in the world, a nation of just a little bit over 3 million people, and yet we are the second most murderous country in the world. We are living with other environmental conditions, some of them out of our control totally. We're living in a stressful environment, and that's why we're talking about a traumatized society. We heard Dr. Green talk about stress being that common feeling that we get when we feel under pressure, when we're overwhelmed or unable to cope. He told us that small amounts of stress is actually good for us in a way, motivate us to achieve our goals and to in this flight of fight. As what stress like when you're taking exams and so on, or before you give a speech, that is not bad stress, but that, as you said earlier, too much stress, especially when it feels out of control, when you are overwhelmed, that this can negatively affect your mood, your physical and your mental well-being, and also our relationships. So let us go now to talk about how do you've identified some of the illnesses. You talk about the importance of maintaining a good gut health and how that relates back to the brain. Some of the illnesses that can come as a result of being under stress, including hypertension and diabetes, which we'll go into another time. But since we're talking about maintaining our best health under all of these conditions, I know you zoomed in just earlier on the immune system. Is this where we start?
Yeah, the immune system is critical because this is a mechanism that the body has in place to really mitigate against illnesses of all sorts. And of course, prolonged stress takes a lot of energy from the system. It increases acidity in the body, generally speaking. There are a lot of free radicals going around unabated, and the entire mix of these type of negative influences are consuming the energy out of the immune system in terms of its function. So you get an immune response, but because the situation is ongoing, the immune system now becomes eventually exhausted. So when it's exhausted, it spins out of control, and then it leaves us vulnerable to even a simple viral infection. It can knock us out, which would otherwise the body would be able to clear in a few days. Now, in terms of we mentioned some of the physical time, but in terms of the mental aspect, it is typical that we would become anxious in stressful situations. So anxiety goes unnoticed in some cases, but in most cases it can have outward effects, excessive perspiration, agitation. So let's imagine a person driving on the road. They get a phone call and the news is something that puts them in this position. Already we can see a logical explanation for why we have so many accidents on the road, because the thing affects your brain, it affects your thinking, you lose focus, and anything can happen. Another of the thing is that we can become depressed. Now, depressed is almost as if we are recoiling from the world, we are retreating, we are exhausted. So we become very depressed, inert. So this is not an aggressive or a proactive stance. It's a stance of withdrawal, trying, what we'd call escapism. We are trying to escape the situation. So we'll go to sleep, cover up, and we probably, if we didn't wake up, we would just remain sleeping there.
Mm-hmm.
So these are extremes. And you have panic attack, where people burst out into cold sweat. They're frightful, agitated. All these are mental effects which comes with the ongoing stress. But shame is one of the very interesting emotions, because the concept of being shamed, when we look through the lens of shame at ourselves, we are unhappy with ourselves, we want to blame ourselves, and we also respond to others around us in the same way. So this particular emotion may be, for example, one of the causes of bleaching. We are ashamed of our pigmentation, we are ashamed of our history of enslavement, etc. And these things impact us to such a, as you call, a visceral and cellular level, that it impacts our behavior. So some people respond by, for example, as I use the bleaching example, to make themselves more acceptable or valuable in their own minds. And at the same time, that same thinking also makes them devalue the others that they are trying not to be. So we could see why there is a propensity to violence, because since the offenders around you are not very valuable, people don't see it as anything to respond or to cope with any rational thinking or behavior. So this level of irrationality that it comes on is one of the causes, most likely, of the extreme high murder rate that we are experiencing.
Violence against ourselves.
Violence against ourselves out of shame. And PTSD, the post-traumatic stress disorder, means that usually a long time has passed since we have experienced that, whatever that extreme traumatic situation was. So the fact is, the impact that it has on us, we do not have to experience it ourselves. As long as we become aware of the situation, the brain interprets it, and it has a similar impact on us even until today.
So that takes us also to post-traumatic slavery disorder, which as Professor Ivan Van Sertima says, whether something happened 10 minutes ago, 10 years ago, or 10,000 years ago, it occupies the same space in your consciousness as if it, once you become aware of it, as if it just happened. And this is a phenomenon. This is a phenomenal situation, isn't it?
Well, that is interesting, and as you mentioned, that is so true. And we have to realize it, although it's not highlighted usually. But for example, another emotion that is of great interest is one that we would formally know as hysteria. They now refer to it as a conversion disorder. But what it means, simply put, when they say a conversion disorder, it means that something that psychologically affects the mind manifests itself in a physical response or behavior. So this is a conversion from mental to physical.
What's interesting is that you have brought me to a comment that I was going to do later, but since we're here, let us talk about it. We didn't plan to talk about it in this interview, but let's go there, because we saw mass hysteria at Oberlin High School just late last week. And I think there was another case that they're looking at in St. James. It sounded pretty similar. But when you talk about hysteria within this context of maintaining your best health, what in particular were you referencing?
Well, for example, I would look back, for example, to the pandemic, because that's just gone the other day. And the fact is that this 2-year period of social isolation, of being locked down, it was not normal, it was not healthy, whether for the young people or the elderly, and there was also isolation based on the demographic separation that they implemented. So let us say that during that period of lockdown, a lot of these children were traumatized, whether they were psychologically or physically or sexually abused, and they were in a situation where they were without any recourse because of the situation. They couldn't access any help. So they had to endure such abuse and stress for a long period of time.
2 years?
So what, 2 years? So I'm going now to a principle of what is known as wired together, fired together, which is just simply put, let us say there's 2 centers in the brain that deal with a situation. Let us say in the mind of a child. For example, the child was being abused, whether physically or however, and then that is recorded in one area of the brain. During the abuse, she was in a situation where she knew that she was locked down based on the protocol of the day.
Mm-hmm.
So these two things now, the idea of being locked down while being abused, is recorded in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say, for example, now, she goes to school, and remember, she's not alone. Many hundreds of all the children across the nation have the same experience, although their response might not be equal, right?
And although you're saying she's he or she, because it affects boy or girl in the same way. Mm-hmm.
Boy or girl. Boy or girl.
Mm-hmm.
So what would happen in this situation? Let's say they go to the school, and the idea of they did something in the school, and the principal or the teacher say, well, you're going to be held in detention.
Mm-hmm.
Just the mention of the detention, which is another synonym for lockdown, could trigger in the brain that past event of being locked down and abused at the same time, and that would result in a conversion of hysteria that would manifest as fainting, dropping, ticking, frothing, whatever, because this is a file together situation.
Yes. And so what you have done for us here is also to put in context and we're not diagnosing the students at Oberlin, because obviously you haven't seen them, but that we can look at this and recognize it as a manifestation of mass hysteria, because it fits a lot of, it ticks almost all the boxes of mass hysteria, as opposed to any kind of, spiritual. There's a whole lot of conversations now about, speaking in tongues, anointment of God, etc., etc. But that is taking it into a fanatic zone, isn't it? As opposed to looking at the psychological context of what might have happened at Oberlin, which obviously, for me, ticked all the boxes of mass hysteria. And I hear you saying a similar thing there.
Right. And to give you another simple example, because human beings, we are really electromagnetic beings. That is a fact.
Yes.
So we manifest on different levels and different wavelengths, different frequencies. Let us say, for example, there are a lot of very bad roads in Jamaica that's causing stress to a lot of people. The bad roads, to the extent where people come and they block the road to get attention in the hope of getting a resolution. So for the commuters, the taxi drivers, this is a stressful situation. When they block the road, for example, people come out in order to ventilate and to make awareness of the situation. So persons who coming to that scene to join the protest, you might have left your house in a normal mood and so, but if the mood is one of anger when you get to the scene, automatically, without even realizing it, you yourself become embroiled in that type of angry mood.
And begin to exhibit anger also.
And even begin to exhibit anger. So that is almost like a mood transference situation.
Yes.
Or what you call, entrainment. So these are situations that are real, and they can become boisterous, if they're not under control.
So in that case then, and because we have the perfect storm in Jamaica for mass hysteria, you have just outlined that, and our listeners and our audience can look up on this and do the research on this, because you've identified a perfect storm situation, especially for our students who were locked down for 2 years, who are in this psychological pressure cooker. It seems to me as if there needs to be then an intervention at the school levels, not just to look at devotions. We saw that with the Minister of Education says she's put a team together to look at devotions, but it would have to go beyond that in having conversations and discussions, serious discussions with teachers and workers in these environments in terms of how they interact with students themselves, different from students having this conversation with students. Because what can trigger mass hysteria, and as we see, as I'm thinking this is probably what happened at Oberlin, is how a teacher might engage with a group, and especially a large group of students. You get a word from God, is what we are hearing in this case. What was said and how it was said could trigger that mass hysteria, couldn't it?
Oh yes. Any type of word, phrase, expression can trigger these things, because the onlookers, once they recognize it, it's almost a reflex reaction. They don't have to think about it actively for it to be activated.
Yeah.
So these are some of the situations that we face on a daily basis, and you highlighted the students there in that example, but by extrapolation, in our particular situation, it actually encompasses over 90% of the population. In fact, all the Africans the black populations, for the most part, we are subject on a daily basis to ongoing stress that has been uncorrected since emancipation. So landlessness still abounds, unemployment is still high, and the conditions of a normal life, food, shelter, clothing, access to proper healthcare and medication, and affordability of these access. The barrier to access is many, based on race, finances, politics, religion. So there is a lot. This is another level of the stress that we face on an ongoing basis. So it's a ours is a very complex cauldron.
Yeah, we need a ministry of empathy. That ministry that I created the other day, Ministry of Constitutional Reform, or whatever that ministry name, that thing they head up. Sorry, I don't want to be. But you know the ministry I'm talking about, this law ministry that they create. Constitutional ministry. What I think that we need in Jamaica is a ministry of empathy, and there's nothing wrong with creating a ministry of empathy and putting an empathetic minister inside there if we can identify one, because so many narcissists out there, I don't even think they can identify the empathy. Let me take a quick break and come back.
Running African, reuniting the African family for development.
All right, we're in the final few moments of our conversation with Dr. Arthur Green. He's a medical doctor, and we're looking at maintaining your best health in a traumatized society. Went off a bit, but it's still connected to look at mass hysteria. It is really connected, and especially because we're in a traumatized society, I think it's something that we should bear in mind. Also to say, to guide our children and to guide those around us to look out for mass hysteria and how to operate if it comes in, if you're in a space where it begins to happen. We have to talk to our children, because this is a reality. Now, Dr. Green, in the final moments that we have, because we really want to zoom in now at how do we maintain our best health? What are some of the things that we can do?
Yeah. Right. Well, first of all, how do people respond generally? Some of them cope by taking drugs, smoking, misuse of alcohol, recreational drugs, and the extreme situation of not coping well is, for example, some people will go as far as suicide, which we saw a lot of that among the teens during the pandemic. So this is a case where they were unable to cope in the extreme. Now, what can be done? As far as we can do, we have to try to make sure that on a daily basis we have access to enough adequate amount of water. And I start with the simplest thing, but water being over 70% of the body's composition is very critical, because we are dehydrated for the most part without realizing it, and this in itself can put us at risk for a lot of other simple but very serious conditions. So try to get enough water on a daily basis. We can add a little lime or lemon juice, small amount, to the water that we drink to help the metabolism and to increase our energy levels if there's nothing else available. In some cases, some persons could, for example, use let us say a teaspoon or two of apple cider vinegar in a large glass of water, just warm, if that's all you have for breakfast. And it would help you throughout the day. Now, very important is exercise. And it doesn't mean you have to go to the gym or to any special exercise area, but in your moving around the house, doing your chores, just try to do what you can do, briskly going around the house, the yard. Any exercise, gardening, is better than doing nothing at all. So, meditation is important. We must practice to take time out, even for 60 seconds or even 3 minutes, just to pause, shut out the world, close your eyes, look to the east, and do some deep breathing, and just think about, the fact that you're alive, and once, as they say, there is life, there is hope. So that whatever the situation we're in now, we are willing it, that we are going to change it in our best interest. So deep breathing and meditation, very important. You inhale, hold it to the count of 10, and slowly release it. And just by doing that, you can take control of yourself, of your breath, oxygenating the brain. If you are experiencing even a panic attack, these are two good measures to apply. Glass of water and controlled breathing.
Mm-hmm. And I hear that you are emphasizing the importance of water.
Yes, water is most important because water is not just to quench your thirst. It comprises over 70% of the body's composition is from water. And so water is important to help the circulation, it helps joint pain, it helps to flush the system, whether through the kidneys or via the gastrointestinal tract. And it also helps to energize the cells. So water is life, as the saying goes.
How important is it to void, to go to the toilet? I mean, how important is it for the bowel movement?
That is very important because we were speaking earlier on about colon health and the fact that colon is connected to the brain. So if we are not evacuating the toxins and the waste from the colon, then obviously the colon will not be able to send the correct message to the brain. So people in that situation will experience headache, dizziness, fatigue, poor appetite, so.
And that is for people who are not, voiding. It's breakfast morning, so we're not going to not having no bowel movement.
On a regular basis.
So, all right.
So,
we have just 5 minutes, so that's why I'm rushing up.
so
Go ahead.
that one was very critical though, because we did say that the colon was where, that is the home of the good bacteria, which we call the microbiomes, which produce the neurotransmitters which it sends in the circulation to the brain to help us calm our mood. So that is very, very critical.
Yeah, we have a lot of constipation in Jamaica, I know. People...
Yes, unrecognized.
Unrecognized. So how
because
often...
just merely passing, emptying the bowels doesn't mean that you're not constipated.
All right, go on. Yes.
Right. So you should include, while we're at the colon, fiber in your diet. So your collard leaves, kale, any type of herb bushes that you have. If you are eating orange, for example, you could always chew a bit of the sap. These are indigestible materials, but when they reach in the colon, these form the groundwork that the good bacteria there can use, break down to form small chain fatty acids. And these are things that is very important for the health of the colon.
And of course, drinking water is important when you're doing this so that you don't bung up yourself just the same.
That's correct. That's correct. It will help with cleansing the colon by increasing the intake of water. Now, the other thing is that we have heliotherapy, meaning that the sunlight. So most of us are indoors for long periods. We should make an effort for at least probably 15 minutes at a time to go out in the early morning sun or in the setting period to get some sunlight on the body. You could take off the top so that you can get a lot of the surface area covered. You know that we get a lot of conversion by way of melanin and vitamin D3 production, which is very critical for proper immune function, bone health and strength, and also in boosting the immune system. Now, if there is one herb that I could come down on, which would be able to help us, is moringa leaves. Now, the moringa tree is widespread in the country, or you might have a friend or know somebody who has it. We could recommend that you get the seeds and plant it, or you can access it by any means. And you can use these leaves as teas, as stir fries. You can make broth, but you will be assured that you are getting a good supply of vitamins, vitamin C, vitamin A, minerals, potassium, calcium, amino acid, and even proteins. When you look at the trees, those young pods that has the seeds, those can be, they are edible and safe. At that stage, they are almost like asparagus. So you could just chop it up, boil it, and you could eat that if you have nothing else, or you could also dice it and stir fry it as well. So
I hear you underscoring sunlight, water, exercise, meditation, because it's mind, body, and spirit, and then deep breathing. In terms of, we have just 2 minutes now. If you were to say, how do you eat the foods we're eating, looking at the carbohydrates, etc., what would you suggest?
Carbohydrates, just, excessive carbohydrates is never good, but of course it's not as harmful as the refined sugar, which is very, very dangerous. So while we talk about what we should do, try your best to avoid refined sugars, because this puts us at risk for mental health as well as physical health.
And when we say refined sugar, we're talking like when it's a 2 pound of sugar, send me a pound of sugar, that kind of sugar, or sugars in other stuff.
They're in our sweet drinks and so on, the granulated sugar. And if you're using a little sugar, try to get the brown sugar, as we say, and use it in small quantities. Right, but the condensed milk, the refined sugar, those, cornstarch and these other things that are in the drinks, try our best to avoid those.
Right.
In terms of mental health, we should regulate our content, what we hear, what we view, what we listen to, sound, music, reading material, or on the digital thing, because, stress sometimes comes in the inability to accept change. And so we're under stress in this time in particular, going from analog to digital, from, intelligence to artificial intelligence, from reality to virtual reality. So this is happening at the same time. So it's, as you say, it's a perfect storm where all of us at some point has to try to maintain our best health by taking control of ourselves, our mind. And once we control the mind, we'll be better able to regulate how we react and also impact a good situation for the body to maintain its best health.
All right. Totally out of time. Thank you so much, Dr. Arthur Green. As usual, a pleasure having you in the space, and we'll continue our conversations throughout the month regarding health. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The informative information presented in this video is motivational and is positively aimed at inspiring, educating and entertaining the viewers with the cutting edge of critical reasoning. If you enjoy the contents on the Black Radar YouTube channel, please consider subscribing to show your support.